Welcome to episode 292 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. This episode is dedicated to Peter, my dear Danish friend who is also obsessed with Argentine football. It is August 19, 1950, Buenos Aires, Huracán against Vélez Sarsfield. 5 minutes remain. Vélez lead 3-1. Then two players start throwing punches. Huracán goalkeeper Héctor Ricardo runs all the way from his goal to join in. Soon the football pitch looks more like a boxing ring. The referee disappears. The police come on. The match is suspended, and every single player on the field is arrested. 22 footballers, all detained, all taken to police station 28, and all about to spend Saturday night in jail. 3 days ago, we told the story of Familia Sea being arrested after breaking Arturo Arrieta's leg in 1936. 14 years later, Argentine football has apparently decided to scale things up. But how did we get here? Argentina had been professional since 1931. We covered that revolution back in episode 199. And as we heard just 3 days ago, this was a deeply physical football culture. Dismissals for rough play, fights, police occasionally becoming involved. By the late 1940s, violence around Argentine matches had become serious enough that the AFA tried something remarkable. It imported referees from Britain. Beginning in 1948, British officials were recruited to Argentine football, partly because the association wanted stronger, more independent control of increasingly difficult matches. By 1950, 14 British referees were working in Argentina. One of them was an Englishman named John Meade, and he is today's referee. The Argentine game he had been imported to help control is about to become completely uncontrollable. And 1950 was already a turbulent moment in Argentine football. The great player strike of 1948 had helped send talent out of the country. Adolfo Pedernera, Alfredo Di Stefano, Nestor Rossi, and many others ended up in Colombia doing El Dorado, the story we revisited only a few episodes ago. Back home, Racing were defending champions and would ultimately retain the title. But as the second half of the 1950 season began, San Lorenzo were leading, and Vélez had ambitions of their own. Vélez were sixth, 5 points behind San Lorenzo under the old 2 points for a win system. Their own ground in Liniers was being rebuilt, so they had even staged their previous match against Ferro at Huracán Stadium. This was a promising Vélez side. Several of the players would form the basis of the team that finished second in Argentina 3 years later. And in their forward line was a 23-year-old named Osvaldo Zubeldia. Much later, Zubeldia would become the legendary coach of Estudiantes, 3 consecutive Copa Libertadores titles and an Intercontinental Cup. Today, he is merely one of the men about to get arrested. Huracán were in a rather different position. The great club from Parque Patricios had been Argentine champions several times during the amateur era, but in 1949 they had barely escaped relegation after a playoff against Lanús. Now they were struggling again near the bottom. So Vélez had title aspirations, Huracán had survival pressure, and the match was already uncomfortable before anybody threw a punch. 2 minutes, Luis Bravo scores for Huracán, 1-0. About 15 minutes later, José Menéndez heads Vélez level, 1-1 at halftime. After the break, Menéndez scores again, 2-1. Huracán protested goal, believing Ricardo Quiñones had been fouled beforehand. The contemporary newspaper, El Laborista, described the match as already having been played in a climate of violence. Then Carmelo Napoli makes it 3-1 to Vélez with about 10 minutes remaining. Vélez have the points. Or so everybody thinks. Of course, 5 minutes to go. A free kick to Vélez near the Huracán penalty area. Pablo Maleni of Vélez and Huracán defender Lino Antonio Badin become involved. The two start exchanging punches. And now goalkeeper Héctor Ricardo sees what is happening. He leaves his goal, runs toward Maleni, and tries to hit him. Vélez players converge on Ricardo. Huracán players converge on them. And that's it. 22 footballers disappear into a mass fight. Then everybody else start arriving. Trainers, masajistas, staff, people from around the tunnel, some outsiders even. Punches, kicks, bodies everywhere. The fight lasts about 5 minutes, but remarkably the crowd mostly watches. Eventually, police and club officials get onto the field and break it up. The players separate. Huracán sit together on one side of the pitch, Vélez on the other. Waiting. Because where's John Meade? Well, he's gone. The referee and his assistants retreated during the confusion. 15 minutes pass. Then an interpreter appears. The announcement. The match is suspended. Vélez 3, Huracán 1, 85 minutes played. And now comes the really extraordinary part. The Policía Federal decide this is no longer merely a football matter. Every one of the 22 players is detained. They are taken first to Seccional 28, Police Station 28. The offense is disorder, 3 days detention, not exchangeable for a fine. After midnight, the players are moved to the municipal detention facility at Villa Devoto, and there they spent the night. Huracán and Vélez, opponents a few hours earlier, and literally fighting each other. Now, apparently, teammates in jail. Outside, directors from both clubs begin negotiating. Families arrive, supporters wait, and eventually on Sunday evening, after almost an entire day behind bars, the players are released. But football is not finished with them. AFA's Tribunal de Peñas now gets involved, and it comes down hard. Every one of the 22 players is suspended. Huracán's punishments run from 5 matches all the way to 15. Vélez's players receive 5 and 6 match bans. The heaviest punishment belongs to Huracán winger Miguel Andrés Di Pace. 15 matches, with the tribunal citing his involvement in the violence and his subsequent lack of respect toward the disciplinary body. Goalkeeper Héctor Ricardo gets 10. Mario Usal gets 8. Juan Figueiredas gets 6 and loses the right to captain the team for a year. Vélez captain Armando Ovide receives an additional 1-year captaincy ban. Even John Meade is stood down for a match. The punishment is so comprehensive that both teams now have another problem. Who exactly is going to play next weekend? Vélez turns to reserves, youngsters and veterans. Their championship challenge collapses. They lose 4 of the next 6 matches and eventually finish 10th. Huracán's immediate response is rather more spectacular. Their next game is against San Lorenzo, the Clásico, and with much of the first team suspended, Huracán field a patched-up side. San Lorenzo go 2-0 ahead. Then a young José Vigo scores 3 times. Huracán win 3-2. 1 week after 22 men were arrested, the replacements produced one of Huracán's great derby comebacks. I'll tell that story another day. But over the longer run, the suspensions hurt badly. Huracán slump. They finish 16th and have to contest another relegation playoff. This time, against Tigre. They survive again. But so what? Well, the first question is obvious. Was this unique? 22 players arrested after 1 match? Extremely unusual. But Argentine football has subsequently managed to surpass even the disciplinary absurdity. On February 27, 2011, Claypole against Victoriano Arenas in the Primera D. Another mass brawl. Referee Damian Rubino eventually sends off not merely the 22 players on the pitch, but substitutes as well. And get this, 36 red cards. It is still the highest reported total in a senior football match. And Argentina does not own a monopoly on this. Earlier this year, the 2026 Campeonato Mineiro final in Brazil between Cruzeiro and Atlético Mineiro ended with a huge fight and 23 red cards issued after the match. Football has spent generations creating more sophisticated systems for controlling violence. Referees, assistants, yellow cards, red cards, disciplinary tribunals, video, retrospective suspensions and fines in closed stadiums. But no regulation has yet invented a switch that turns emotion off at the final whistle. And that takes us somewhere uncomfortable. July 19, 2026, New Jersey, the World Cup final. Spain beat Argentina 1-0 after extra time. Argentina have already finished with 10 after Enzo Fernandez's dismissal. Then comes the final whistle. Spain celebrate. And another fight begins. Nahuel Molina appears to strike Spain captain Rodri. Leandro Paredes clashes with Eric Garcia and Xavi. Players and staff pile in. Lionel Scaloni is among those trying to pull people apart. Spanish coach Luis de la Fuente later calls the behavior intolerable and unacceptable. Roberto Ayala, part of Argentina's coaching staff, publicly apologizes for his own involvement. And FIFA opens formal proceedings. As things stand today, Paredes faces 3 potential assault violations. Molina 2 potential assault violations plus unsporting behavior. Ayala 1 potential assault violation. Diego Almada 1 for unsporting behavior. And interestingly, Spain's Xavi is also charged with unsporting behavior. The cases remain unresolved. And here's where this becomes more complicated than simply saying Argentina behaved badly, because Xavi, one of the Spaniards dragged into the melee, subsequently said he did not think the Argentine players should receive further suspensions. He acknowledged that it was hardly an example for children, but he also said football has a more violent side and suggested that sometimes what happens inside that emotional world should stay there. And that is fascinating, because perhaps there's actually two rule books in football. One is written, FIFA calls assault, unsporting behavior is called unsporting behavior, but the same disciplinary code applies whether you come from Buenos Aires, Barcelona, Birmingham, or Belo Horizonte. But then there's the unwritten book. What counts as provocation? When must you defend a teammate? When is walking away admirable self-control? And when, inside another football culture, does walking away look like weakness? The Argentine sociologist Pablo Albaceres has written about a football culture of aguante, endurance, standing your ground, showing that you do not retreat. It can produce extraordinary collective strength. It can also create a logic in which responding to provocation becomes honorable, even when everybody outside that code sees something completely different. And it is important not to turn that into an Argentine stereotype. The 23 red cards in Brazil this year rather destroy that argument. And so do mass fights in Europe and almost everywhere else football is played. Football violence is global. But football's interpretation of toughness, honor, provocation, and restraint is not necessarily universal, which perhaps explains why controlling it is so difficult. The AFA tried in 1950. It already imported English referees. After Huracán Vélez, it jailed nobody itself. The police did that, but the association suspended all 22 players. It punished the referee. And AFA President Valentin Suarez called the captains and coaches of the first division together 4 days later and effectively told them, enough, reduce the violence, control yourselves. 76 years later, FIFA has cameras from every angle, a disciplinary code hundreds of pages more sophisticated than anything John Meade worked with, and a prosecutor examining the World Cup final. And still, we're having the same conversation. Perhaps that is the limit. Football can impose one set of laws. It cannot make billions of people around the planet feel the game in exactly the same way. So before we go, 3 things to take away from August 19, 1950. First, this really happened. Huracán and Vélez were 5 minutes from finishing a league match when a fight between players became a battle involving all 22. The police detained every one of them. They spent the night in Villa Devoto. And second, the authorities did react aggressively. All 22 received football suspensions. The referee was punished. The AFA summoned captains and coaches, and the sanctions materially changed both clubs' seasons. But punishment did not eradicate football violence. And third, perhaps that is because the global game shares laws without always sharing the same unwritten code. What one person calls aguante, another calls provocation. What one player believes belongs to football, another believes crosses the line. The challenge is finding enough common ground for one game to belong to everybody. On this day in 1950, Vélez were beating Huracán 3-1. Then football stopped. The punches started. John Meade disappeared down the tunnel. And 22 professional footballers went from the pitch at Parque Patricias to jail. That is all for episode 292 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. Tomorrow, August 20, 1916, Stockholm, Sweden against the United States. And for the first time ever, an official United States national soccer team walks onto the field for an international match. Why was America's first international played thousands of miles from home, in Scandinavia, in the middle of the First World War? Stay tuned.